So, let's start this. We're here to talk about Act 10, what happened, the effect of it, and the path forward. So, my name is Bert Zipper. I'm a member of Madison Teachers Incorporated retired unit here in Madison, Wisconsin. And I'm sort of the moderator for this. What we're planning on doing is 4 parts. We're going to start with what Act 10 did, the effects of it over the last 12, 13 years, the current court case, and then an overall union perspective. So that's what we're hoping to do. And let me introduce to you the panel. To my far left, Chris Donahue, Staff Counsel for Law Forward. Anything you want to add?
I'm relatively new to Law Forward. I've been there about a year. I was at the ACLU of Wisconsin before that and Legal Action of Wisconsin before that. So a long time nonprofit right here.
And you know everything about the current court case.
Everything.
I worked in elementary schools. I like to do broad generals. Sarah Bringman, longtime special ed teacher, member of Math Teachers Incorporated, former president of MTI, and former president of the MTI retired unit. Anything you want to add, Sarah?
And I spent a great deal of time bargaining teacher contracts in my stay.
And we're going to talk about the bargaining differences with Act 10. Next, Emily Pritzko. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, you are.
The executive director of the Wisconsin Building Trades Council, which covers 40,000 workers across Wisconsin. Talking about the union perspective, what would you like to add?
We're actually a newer organization. Our member unions, as I'm sure you know, have been organizing for about 130 years here in Wisconsin, but we have every union, from some of the larger construction unions I'm sure everyone's familiar with, the UA, plumbers, steam fitters, sprinkler fitters, carpenters, operating engineers, laborers, electricians, down to some of the more specialized trades, elevator constructors, heat and frost insulators. So they all sit around our table, one trade, one vote.
That's excellent. And last, but certainly very much not least, Mike Jones, special ed teacher and current president of Math Teachers Incorporated. Mike, what do you want to add?
Just that, even though I'm not in the classroom now, I was in the classroom as a second-year teacher when Act 10 happened, so it's had a profound impact on my career and my life. So I'm just very happy to be here, and I'm really happy that you're here, Bert.
Wherever you are is a good place to be. So let's start off with Act 10, what it did. Sarah Bringman, you want to start us off?
Sure.
And we want this to be a conversation.
Yeah.
So
please interrupt me with any questions or asking for clarification, if I can. So I did teach special education in Madison schools for 33 years, all at the middle school level, which means I'm odd because I loved my job and I loved middle schoolers. Then for 10 years I worked for the university in a prep program for special education teachers. So that just kept me in the classroom for another 10 years, and I loved it. Also, over the last 10 years, I have volunteered at O'Keefe Middle School in Madison. Again, with those middle schoolers, you can't get away from them, in my son's classroom. Both of my children are working in Madison Public Schools and have been for 15 years. So it's pretty exciting. Education was obviously a value component to our family. And sometimes it didn't mean it came easy. My son in particular had to be pushed quite a bit. But it's where we found ourselves and where we are obviously most happy. Act 10 served to bring my family closer together because it affected not only my children but their partners. And all of a sudden there were these 4 adults in my family that all needed someone to back them because Act 10 was about to disrupt their professional careers, their careers of choice. Probably the hardest thing about Act 10 is it came from a governor who did not respect education. He was the governor for the state of Wisconsin who did not have a college degree. Education was not something he valued. And he saw teacher unions as the only force holding teachers above water. So, crush it. And he has been successful in some cases. Luckily, I was in Madison. MTI continues to prevail, and we are very proud of that. But what Act 10 did was to say you can't collectively bargain anymore except around base wage. So all the other things in my contract, which at that time was 120 pages, were like, that has to do with money, yes. But it also had to do with class size, planning time, collaboration time. It had to do with us preparing a learning environment for the students we worked with and for. For myself, for example, planning time for me meant meeting with every academic teacher who worked with one of my students a week in advance so that I could prepare accommodations, modifications, anything that made their classroom work accessible to them. That meant that those teachers also had to have been planned for a week in advance. So that planning time was incredibly important. How can I possibly meet with all of you now if your planning time is being taken by mandatory meetings? At the university level, I also felt it. Act 10 meant that my teachers that I was training and trying to get to be enthusiastic about being in a classroom, anywhere from kindergarten through high school, all in special education, I'm wanting them to be excited, to feel really proud of what they chose as their direction in life. And now, that money, we always like to say it's not about the money, but I have to tell you that getting a license from UW-Madison to teach special education costs the same amount of money as getting an engineering degree, as getting a business degree. It all costs the same. So my students were going to have to pay off their loans in addition to living their lives on less money. It had a profound effect. They also required local unions to do something called recertify every single year. And it's a wonderful process. It's when you decide as teachers in your district, should we maintain having a union represent us? Of course, they've taken away all of our planning time. We have no time to do anything other than breathe, hopefully. Okay, and now they want to tell us that the union can't represent us unless 50% of all of those teachers vote in favor of maintaining the union.
Can you highlight that? That's over 50% of all teachers.
All teachers.
If you don't vote, it's a no.
Right.
Which, of course, Scott Walker won all of his elections with that kind of percentage.
So remember that,
Sarcasm.
if you didn't join the union before, and now the union's not going to be able to do a whole lot because they can only bargain over base wages. Why would you want to pay union dues? And then once a year we're going to ask you to vote in favor of maintaining the union. And if you don't get 50% plus one, your union is dissolved. It's gone. And that's the reason behind many of our locals across the state of Wisconsin losing their unions. Okay? And that wasn't just teachers. All of the security professionals in our district had to vote. All of the substitutes in our district who belong to a unit within MTI had to vote to recertify. It's hard to find all these people to come together. And again, we don't have planning time. So, hey, we can just do this on our own time when we're not planning because we don't have planning time during the school day. It also required that teachers pay at least 12% of their health insurance. Now, over the course of years, my union bargained to have my health insurance covered because that was non-taxable. So I could say, okay, I won't take that extra 2% increase in my salary. That would be taxed. I will ask my district through the union to pay for my health insurance. Thrown out. Then we were told we had to pay 100% of our retirement contribution to the Wisconsin retirement system. That was an additional 6% off of my salary. So immediately following Act 10, teachers throughout the state saw a 10% decrease in the money they brought home. Yes?
I have a question about the pension. The 6%, did the school district originally do like a matching or?
Yes, they paid 6%, we paid 6%. Except that they, in our case, paid the whole thing because we bargained for that.
Right.
Again, we bargained to have non-taxable monies coming home with us. So you have all of these people making far less money. And in fact, 5 years later, Madison teachers were not making the money that they did prior to Act 10. What a surprise. Teachers left. There was no security. There was no place to go to get that security in the state of Wisconsin. So as a teacher, even if I would say, oh, well, I'm going to go to Verona, guess what? They had Act 10 too. Okay, so all of a sudden we had a situation where teachers were not being offered the same compensation. School boards went, yay! It was part of a budget bill and it was going to save our districts a lot of money because they're not going to have to pay for their teachers. The biggest portion of their budget are salaries and benefits for the staff in their schools. They cheered. At the university level, we started seeing our well of students who wanted to go into education diminish. Why would you want to go into this profession that is spoken of so poorly and then make not enough money to pay back your student loans? So they left. So we don't have new teachers coming in. And lo and behold, now you're in 2024, and Madison, which used to be considered the most wonderful district in the world, couldn't get teachers.
Sarah, could we switch to Mike?
Yes.
I'm painfully aware of the
Yes.
time. I'm sorry.
I would just add, so I was in another district when Act 10 happened. I was a second-year teacher, special ed on an emergency. I had gone through a non-traditional program, emergency license. So I knew very little of the whole system. I learned a lot my first year because I was in Milwaukee and that was an education. One of the things that I could add from, at that time, a younger teacher's experience was that trust immediately broke down. People stopped trusting each other. Colleagues stopped trusting each other. Colleagues stopped trusting admin. Admin stopped trusting colleagues. And when that was paired with No Child Left Behind type initiatives, Race to the Top initiatives, these sort of things, as we were talking about pushing, like Common Core, pushing canned curriculum down people's throats, it led to just a lot of implicit and explicit conversations where people couldn't trust each other. At the district I was in, I remember feeling really proud because I was in the Act 10 protest. I was marching around, listening, getting energized. And I remember doing that with most of the board members at the district I was in. It was a suburb of Madison. And we were high-fiving each other, and we were like, oh, we're all in this together. You know, there was admin walking around during Act 10, you know, because they're like, this is gonna screw us too, and this is not good for our system. Immediately after Act 10 passed, the same school board tried to get rid of Just Cause in my district.
Could you explain that?
Just Cause is essentially just due process. Like, so if a teacher or any worker is accused of something, or, you know, they are up for being fired, they should be able to have their day in court, so to speak, to be able to say, hey, you know, have a trial, have a discussion. You know, it's something every worker deserves, regardless of what field you're in. You know, we would want there to be some sort of process like we would believe in our justice system, that we don't send someone immediately to prison. You know, although of course if you look like me, that's a foregone conclusion, but like, you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So the same people who were pushing that did that. And then they were mad when my union pushed back on it. And they said, oh, we feel betrayed as a school board. Ironically, one of those same people was like a very prominent person within WPEN, so I would always run into them at these sort of things. I haven't seen them in a while, but still. So even the people who said they agreed with you on paper, all of a sudden began, and I remember watching, like, it wasn't just like money. It was like, all of a sudden there were school districts that were saying women couldn't wear pants and they had to wear skirts that would reach their ankles. Like, we were getting super archaic. School districts that got rid of everyone's prep time, just eliminated everyone's prep time. So you no longer had time to actually prep, while pushing more initiatives. And then what happened was people just stopped talking to each other. People ended up just staying in their rooms or their spaces. And so when things naturally happen in a school, you know, that cause conflict or crisis, people didn't come together or didn't know how to come together. And that's something I've seen, especially as I've gotten older, and especially as a union person. Also, you know, part of recertification, we recertify every year. It's a huge time suck. So instead of trying to talk about building solidarity or talking about building our contract, I literally spend, me and those in the office and our board, our reps spend September to November just getting people to vote, like getting people ready to vote, getting people ready to do this thing. And if you don't vote, yeah, it counts as a zero. Also, it's done in such an onerous way. There is a local district that's an urban district that lost their certification because because you also have to pay for it. Unions have to pay for it. It costs $15,000 to get to recertification, which for a larger district like us, like MTI, you know, we can handle it. But if you're a smaller district, that's another why a lot of smaller rural districts decertify, because they couldn't afford it. But you have to pay the Wisconsin, the WERC for the honor of them doing your election. There was an urban district this past year that got decertified because their check got got delayed in the mail, so it missed the deadline by like a day, and the WERC decertified them for their election in September.
Can I just quick ask, was the recertification, is that something that had to be paid for in the past, or how did?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's part of, the onus is on the union. They're saying if you want to be a union, you have to pay for it, and you have to do all the legwork.
But it used to be a one-time cost.
It used to be a one-time cost, but now, like, it's an annual cost. It's part of our budget, right? Sorry.
Is that a flat rate, no matter how large the district is, no matter how large the union is, it's $15,000?
That I do not know. I don't know if people from other unions, if there's.
It's per thing, like
It's
if
per
you're
member.
around, it's $500.
Yeah, for building trades, I think it's like 150 if you have 100 or less, and like 250 for.
So it does scale, but it's still
So-
an annual cost.
But it's still an annual cost, and the rules are specifically set up to make sure that you are no longer a union. These are not like, well, you know, there are no exceptions. There are no, like, if you don't cross a T, don't dot an I. Like, that's why we don't send ours in the mail. We drive it to the WERC, or we send it via certified mail, so there's a paper trail on it. Like, but that's not the WRC's fault, that's how Act 10 is written out. These things, and also just the discussion around Act 10 caused a lot of people in the community to just stop trusting their schools and begin saying, oh, teachers, so then when we get into later conversations around critical race theory, equity, those sort of things, woke agendas, and DEI and all that bullshit, people naturally feel like they don't trust their schools because it was dividing and conquering everyone in the community. So even if you had a neighbor that worked at schools or sent their kids to schools, they all of a sudden would call you a groomer, or said you were only in it for yourself. You were in it, you know, even though you're literally on the same block paying the same amount of property taxes for a similar house, but you're the greedy one. And what it did was it caused other people it just split people against each other and caused more rancorous, like people, I know families who no longer are on speaking terms because of Act 10. People who they got divorced because of Act 10. Like, there is a real emotional cost that goes beyond just money. Not to say money isn't important, but like that's something I witnessed, especially in the system since 2011 to now, which is a significant distrust. And so even when there are things that we agree on, it is tough to trust folks. Like, doing this panel, doing this stuff, I have to work with the district. I couldn't help but have it in the back of my head. Should I trust MMSD? Should I, they want the same shit I want, but we spend a lot of time arguing over things, and it makes it so much more difficult to get together on things, even when we do agree. And I think that's a huge, huge wound that even with current legislation and things like that, there will be cultural healing and societal healing that we're going to have to attend to for decades to come to rebuild our trust in each other.
That's an important point. Please. I want to transition, if possible, to how about Chris?
Well, I want to talk about how...
Emily, take it away.
I know that Chris is going to have them wrapped.
Okay, Emily, take it away, your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd start with from the unionized construction trades were impacted differently by Act 10, obviously. We have several hundred members that were working at state facilities, and they, for the most part, continue to certify and work there. But their experience really kind of mirrors what Sarah and Mike were saying about everyone always assumes like unions are associated with wages. That's our bottom line here, and I think we all know the biggest lesson from Act 10 is that unions are about so much more than wages, and that is what has really been lost for those workers as well. For us, they mean safety. They mean, like Mike was talking about, due process. They mean equity. They mean dignity of work and a path to the middle class. And that continues to be, for us, the brand that we run on, because most of our workers in the state, those 40,000 workers we talked about in the beginning, work with, in our industry, signatory contractors who, for the most part, we can organize some non-union shops into union shops, but a lot of our contractors choose to partner with our unions to get their workforce. We kind of act like a job agency on steroids for them. And we've also seen that under Walker, it wasn't just Act 10, right? It's kind of the old adage of first they came for, like they will slowly chip away at everything, and they definitely went after our trades. So like a lot of the panelists and advocates here today, we've operated in the margins where we need to. We've really relied on apprenticeship as a way to talk about unions and the value we bring. Right now, registered apprentices can also be non-union, but I would say have about 90% of them are through our unions, and it's because of those values we just talked about. Because we provide a really attractive pay and benefit package. We have the highest level of training and safety for our employer partners, and that apprenticeship model works for us, and we fund it fully. Our members pay into a fund to train our apprentices for 3 to 5 years. And so for us, that's been a way we've moved forward. I'm really excited to hear the presentation on the recent court challenge that's been made, because I think From our perspective, this all happened so quickly. I was not working for the trades at the time. I had just been working for Senator Feingold in his federal office. Ron Johnson came out of nowhere with the Tea Party, took him out. Me and all my coworkers were unemployed, walking around protesting like, oh my God, like, what is happening? You know, I was so young, early 20s. And then immediately after that, I went and worked in the Capitol for 10 years. So my perspective was the fallout from that. But that has been slow and painful fallout from our perspective, from the trades, from the legislation that was passed in 2015, 2017. And I don't think anyone in this room is under the assumption that this is going to be a quick path back to where we were, but that there are really valuable lessons we can learn from it that can allow us to come back stronger. The final takeaway I'd say is just, it's been repeated here in different ways, but unions, everywhere they exist, are about raising the bar and the standards for the institutions in which they operate in. And we see that in the construction industry. There are two faces of that industry, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware. There are our members that make excellent middle-class wages, that have a voice in their workplace, that organize, that have employer partners. And then there's a really predatory aspect of that industry that we fight against, and we unite to raise the bar across the board. Anytime a worker in our industry is helped, that is a win. It doesn't need to be a union worker. And we have a lot of different strategies we do to raise awareness around that and to take action there. But in our schools especially, it's been devastating, like we've talked about. I think that was the intention of the law when it was passed. It was to attack those institutions. And like Mike was alluding to, the values they represent that are super personal to all of us and that have led to the division you saw amongst families, amongst lifelong friends, because that was what it was meant to attack. And it's going to be a long road back from that. So.
And now there's the court case.
Speaking of the road back. So, before I get into the details of the case, I just want to give a little bit of background about Act 10 that hasn't already been discussed or we haven't dug into yet, which is this distinction between general employees and public safety employees. Many of you may be familiar, but many of you may not be. Act 10 said we hate unions and we're going to dismantle all these union protections, but only for some employees. We're super cool with all the employee union protections for police officers and firefighters, of course. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out how incredibly gendered the distinction is between educators and the public safety employees. But there was also something very weird about the public safety employee categorization. It included police officers, it included firefighters, it included sheriffs, traffic police officers, members of the state traffic patrol, but it also included motor vehicle inspectors, and it didn't include other groups of people that carry guns and have the power to arrest people and play a public safety role, including conservation wardens and forest rangers, a forest fire control assistant, a conservation patrol boat engineer, and others. So if you wanted to group employees with public safety, it would make sense to include all of the employees that play a public safety role, that carry weapons, that have the power to arrest. All of these things are what categorize a public safety employee under any rational test. But that's not how they did it. What they did, it seems, is created distinctions that were arbitrary and maybe political. Like maybe the groups of people that carried guns and had arrest power, but weren't necessarily voting conservative, were included in the group of people who lost their union protection. That includes the Capitol Police. It includes the UW Police. And so they were, those groups of public safety employees were not protected under the public safety employee categorization, where Act 10 sort of like left all of their bargaining and union protections in place. So everything stayed fine for them, and then it was the general employees that lost all of these all of these union protections, and that included the teachers along with all these other public safety employees that I've talked about. Under the general employees now, we have a distinction between the general employees that are represented and the general employees that aren't represented. And of course, those two groups are treated differently in some respects. So, getting to litigation, I know no one likes lawyers, no one likes litigation. I'm a lawyer, and I will still say litigation is always a last resort. And in this case, it was the only resort. We weren't able to stop Act 10 from going through. We weren't able, with our gerrymandered legislature, we weren't able to repeal it. And so, things had to come to a head in court. And there were two prior cases to the one that's relevant today. One that was filed by WEAC and another one that was filed by MTI. The WEAC, and both of those cases failed to invalidate Act 10. The WEAC case was filed in federal court and it went up to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. And then the MTI case was filed in state court and it went up to the Supreme Court of Wisconsin. Those cases were a little bit different, and I want to talk about them because it's important to understand why the case today is succeeding, likely to succeed, where those two cases failed when there were some sort of similar interests and similar claims. The WEAC case filed in federal court, it never applied Wisconsin's principles of equal protection. And when I say equal protection, I mean we have to treat similarly situated people the same. And there's an argument that Act 10 has this arbitrary distinction and is treating some employees differently than others, and there's no rational basis to do that, and that would violate our equal protection guarantees. We have equal protection guarantees in the federal constitution and in the state constitution. So the WEAC case went to federal court and said Act 10 violates the federal equal protection clause, and there were some other claims as well, and that failed. The Madison teachers case that was filed in state court, it brought a claim under our state equal protection claim, but a couple things. One, it was looking specifically at how Act 10 treated the represented general employees versus the unrepresented general employees, and the case focused on that distinction within the general employee category. The general employee, again, that includes the teachers, the conservation wardens, and all the other people who lost their union protections. And then the other thing about the Madison teachers case is, although it included a state claim for equal protection, most of the briefing and the argument was focused on the jurisprudence from federal equal protection. And for a long time in our courts, the courts have kind of just said, like, yeah, there's two equal protection clauses, state and federal, but they're pretty much the same. We'll treat them pretty much the same. And there's never really been enough in-depth analysis about what our Wisconsin Equal Protection Clause means. Our Constitution is independent from the federal one, and we have the right to have more robust and expansive rights in our Constitution, and I would argue we do, than the federal Constitution. These two constitutions serve different purposes. They say different things. They have different language. So, although that case brought an equal protection claim, it was a little bit different than the current case I'm about to talk about, and also the case really just sort of focused on the federal equal protection law and didn't address enough or really explore what our state constitution guarantee of equality might mean in regards to Act 10. So, how much time do I have?
A few more minutes and let's open up to questions, but how much time do you need?
No, a couple minutes is fine. So, fast forward to today. We have a case brought by many plaintiffs. Abbotsford Education Association is the top plaintiff, so it's often referred to as the Abbotsford case. But this case was brought by multiple education associations, the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, multiple local chapters of union, individuals, and SEIU and the Teamsters. And it was filed against the state agencies and groups that are responsible for enforcing Act 10. And then, of course, the legislature intervened because they thought maybe those defendants wouldn't be saying what the legislature wants to be saying. So the legislature wants to get in there to be sure that they can make their points. And this case is also an equal protection challenge, but it's only under our state educational or equal protection clause. And what this case did was really looked at how Act 10 separated public safety employees from general employees. And it raised all the things that I was talking about earlier about how weird it is that the Capitol Police and conservation wardens and the UW police aren't considered public safety employees, and there's a long list of others as well. And you know, we argued that this is totally arbitrary. At best, it's arbitrary. At worst, it's Machiavellian, right, and very political. But this does not hold up to the standards that we have under equal protection law about how if we're gonna treat groups differently, you need to have a rational basis for doing that. Otherwise, it just looks like discrimination. And so that was the basis, that was one of the bases of the legal claims. There are some others, but where we are in the procedure now is the judge, in this case, Judge Frost, just recently denied a motion to dismiss, which means that the legislature moved to have this case thrown out, and they said, hey, there's already been a challenge from WEAC, there's already been a challenge from MTI, this state Supreme Court has upheld this, the Seventh Circuit has upheld it, you can't bring a third claim, like you don't get another bite at the apple. The judge said, this is like a little bit of a different apple, and I think that we do get a bite, and you know, he distinguished this case from the prior cases, and this is a constitutional issue. This is about our state constitution, and it's important to remember that it doesn't matter if we're 14 years out from Act 10. If it's unconstitutional, courts need to deal with it. We can't just let unconstitutional laws sit, no matter how long time has gone on. So he said, we are going to take another bite here, and I'm going to deny the motion to dismiss. I'm going to let the case go forward. He didn't just say, I'm going to let the case go forward. He said, and also I'm going to tell you what I think about the merits. I think that the merits of Act 10 are 2 thumbs down. I think that, and he goes through it very detailed, and he says this makes no sense. This classification, how you distinguish general employees from public safety employees, it is not rational. It does not make sense. It doesn't hold muster. There's no way that this is constitutional. Now, the case has not yet been thrown out because of some wonky technical things with the case. So there's going to be briefing in August to try to wrap this up. And then we hope to get a decision from the judge in the fall that's final and says that, you know, not only are we going to let the case proceed, but also I'm going to fine for the plaintiffs, and I'm going to order that certain provisions of Act 10 be struck down. So this is an enormous win. But, and we should celebrate, but Act 10 has been in place for 13 years, and it's most likely this case will get appealed. And because it's been in place for 13 years, the status quo now is Act 10. That's the status quo. And so it's very possible, if not likely, that this judge is going to stay his decision, meaning I'm going to fine for the plaintiffs that Act 10 is unconstitutional, but we're just going to put a pause on invalidating these provisions of Act 10 until this works its way through the appellate system. We expect there to be appeals all the way up to the Supreme Court, and for the purpose of just sort of like maintaining order in the state, we want to get a final decision from the final decision makers, that's the state Supreme Court, and then we'll know. So a lot's going to depend on what happens with the April election, who's at the Supreme Court when this case makes it up there. But it's very encouraging to see such a thorough analysis from this circuit court judge that's supportive.
Could I just clarify if it's possible that all of Act 10 will be thrown out or just a very small area?
So Act 10 was this like massive law that affected all sorts of things. It was a budget repair bill that had a lot of stuff that had nothing to do with teachers or unions. So we are just talking about these provisions that affect unions and that we've already went over. So this is stuff about the annual recertification, about the automatic direct withdrawal for dues, collective bargaining, those kinds of things.
Okay. I'd like to open up for questions. Let's start in the back.
I have a political question. I'm from California. So this is not, so why did Walker do Act 10 before right to work?
Because, is it, well, actually, Sarah, you're.
Take it away, both of you.
Well, one, because it it only affected primarily school teachers, whereas right to work affected all unions statewide, including private. So what you had was a much bigger challenge. So he started, because of course teachers, aren't worth it. So we start there,
Not very
we'll get rid of those, we'll get everybody in favor of that, and then we'll go on to our bigger bite.
Wasn't he caught on tape talking to the billionaire from Beloit,
Yes.
Hendricks thing, saying,
Divide and conquer.
Divide and conquer.
And one thing to say is also, like, if you look, like, historically, like, private sector unions are kind of here in terms of membership, public sector unions have always maintained, and also, like, if we're looking at campaign finance, not to say this is right or wrong, but when we're talking about big money, public sector unions are the largest donors to usually historically Democratic candidates. So if you go after the Democratic money machine, you're going to impact fundraising and things of the party that they fund the most. As the Teamster president at the RNC, as confusing as that was, it's not like the Teamsters are giving a lot of money to Trump, at least, compared to Harris. So, I think there's also the cynical, we're just going to cut the money off at the legs, especially once when they overturned McCain-Feingold, and it was like, you can just flood this system. We know how great that is with the amount of money that goes into these systems.
Jess, you had a question?
Yeah, two-part clarifying question for Chris. Under Act 10, you talked about the distinction between general employees and public safety employees. Did public safety employees have any changes made to their ability to organize and their ability to form unions?
None.
Okay, so you're seeking with this new suit to essentially return that ability to have collective bargaining and have all of the benefits of unions to public sector employees.
Yes, and we don't know exactly what the judge would do, but we would say that that's the proper outcome in this case. If you find that the way that they distinguish these categories was unconstitutional, then you need to return all the rights to all the categories, and if they want to try again with new legislation, then that's a legislative priority. Thank you.
Can you talk about fair share for a second? We haven't talked about fair share.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. Fair share means that, for example, teacher unions had fair share prior to Act 10, which meant that everybody who would benefit from the collective bargaining by our union paid their fair share of dues. They didn't have to pay anything for political action, but they had to pay for the collective bargaining group at their union. That was gotten rid of, which meant, and in MTI, we had like 98% membership in MTI. Because you wanted to be a member, since you had to pay union dues, you wanted to have a voice in your union. When they got rid of fair share, that number in terms of membership dropped because people didn't want to pay union dues. And now they had an option. Okay. So that also squashed or got rid of a lot of locals.
Thank you for clarifying that. Take it away.
Kind of a strategy question, Chris, not to be like doom and gloom, but so imagine if the court or the judge rules that the distinguishments they made aren't constitutional. One, what is stopping the legislature, if anything, from just saying, all right, we were wrong about not allowing some people with guns to unionize versus others to not unionize? So one, what's stopping them from just coming back and saying, we're just going to say that teachers and people that don't carry firearms can't unionize? And then two, how does that inform strategy? Like, I'm thinking, good example like Roe versus Wade, difference between relying on a court case to kind of set the bounds versus like proactively seeking to put legislation that would guarantee the right to collectively bargain. So I think two-part question, but just thinking down the road.
So the first part of your question is, the legislature can do what it wants. If they want to pass a law right now that overrides Act 10 and reclassifies people, they can do that. And that, of course, would affect our case because the old law would be moot and now we'd have to refile. I think the chances of the legislature doing that are very low. I also see that we have new maps now and we're going to have a new legislature soon, hopefully, that's much more representative. And so it's, I think, highly unlikely that in the next couple of years we're going to see that. However, the legislature, of course, at any time can do that. And just as a very small example, Law Forward brought the redistricting case last fall, and as we were going through that litigation, the Supreme Court said, yeah, these maps are unconstitutional. But before we got to the point where the Supreme Court picked maps, the legislature did decide to pass a law saying, well, how about these maps? And that did put a pause, or essentially like moot our case, because the Supreme Court no longer had to pick maps. We had new maps, and they passed muster under the new rule the Supreme Court had set. As to your second question, I have forgotten it.
Basically, like, are there proactive steps, say if Act 10 gets, these parts of Act 10 get overturned, are there proactive steps to not just rely on court, a single judge or a Supreme Court ruling in a certain way, and are there proactive steps that could actually like lock in guarantees for some of the protections that Act 10 took away?
Yeah, I think that at a like basic, very basic civics level, there is always an opportunity to pass laws. And so if we in the state want to pass laws that put in extra protections for union workers, we can always do that. And then something that's even stronger than that is we as a people kind of have the right to amend our Constitution. However, any proposal to amend our Constitution has to come out of our legislature. So, if we have a legislature that wants to support unions, they can always propose to the voters an amendment to our Constitution that has additional protections for unions or for teachers or for the possibilities are limitless in some ways. But we in the state do not have the type of direct ability to propose constitutional amendments like in other states. You can't just have a grassroots effort to put an amendment on the ballot. But amending the Constitution and writing new laws, those are the two proactive ways to try to stay out of court.
Questions? Take it
Can I
away.
add something? The governor
please,
has to
please.
sign any proposal they make, which right now,
Yeah.
I would hope he not sign that. And I think there are legislators at this conference, and maybe their staff is in the room too, that have introduced
legislators.
language that would enshrine the right to collectively bargain.
That would be a great thing.
Yeah.
So.
Who did I just say? Yes, go.
Did you say you expect the district court final decision in September, or what was the?
We expect a final decision on the whole case sometime this fall. There's no timeline, there's no deadline. The judge can take as much time as he wants, but he's been moving pretty quickly in this case.
Okay, great, thank you.
Take it away.
So this, I can sorry if this is too detailed, but I do have a question. Would we advocate, I'm a Fox Cities Advocates for Public Education, and we advocate the declining salaries of teachers. So I'm wondering in this, and then the public school funding, how it's not increased relative to inflation. I'm wondering within this lawsuit, if it breaks out, if there's details that show, these enforcement, how their salaries and benefits have benefited over time or changed over time versus the teacher's salary. Because one of the biggest questions that we get when we're out there presenting to people is they say, well, I wish my salary would increase with inflation. I'd like to find some data that shows workforce salaries over time versus the impact of Act 10 on teacher salaries over time. Does it exist?
You should
Or
talk.
Wisconsin only,
You
not
should
national.
talk to Christopher Saldana. He's an associate professor at UW who's studying school finance specifically and the effects. And I think that he's tracking not only education outcomes, but everything from how we're funding schools and how that relates. And I think he may have data on teacher salaries. To answer the question about how it relates to the particular legal challenge, if this case is successful, then teachers again have the right to collective bargaining for their salaries beyond just base wages. And so they should have the ability to raise wages. And this case does not, however, specifically address any school finance issue. I am very interested in whether there is litigation that could succeed to challenge our current school finance system, but that is separate to the question of what, what are the union rights?
Just
to follow up on that, thank you. Would you be able to collect damages and lost wages from the difference? Just curious.
I don't believe that is something that's being asked for in this case. This is simply about striking down unconstitutional provisions and not about past damages, but I love the way you're thinking.
Other questions? Take it away.
So I'm a little bit of an outsider. I'm not an educator, I'm an organizer. From your perspectives, would it be fair to say that the financial penalties that came with Act 10 were a significant problem, but the real harm was caused by kind of enabling institutions under pressure to cut corners when it comes to their people?
Yeah, because it's capitalism. As long as, your employer is always trying to get the most work out of your employee for the least amount of money, and the employee is always trying to maximize the most amount of money. So yeah, that was true even before Act 10. It was just, there used to be so many other honest discussions that we can have. I can say from the teacher standpoint, one of the things that's happened like in modern negotiations is there's so many things that now get put into the cost of living adjustment argument that all of a sudden we've ceded territory on things like our class sizes, our caseloads for like special ed, ESL, working conditions, hours of working, being able, like additional job duties, especially in the last few years when the exodus has finally, the public has caught up to the fact that we do not have enough staff, so there's a lot of subbing that's going on. And people, like a teacher, if they sub in my district, they are paid less than the contract rate that they're getting paid. They're getting paid right now like $22 an hour. So to sub in a classroom, but that means it also impacts planning time and stuff like that. So what it does is it creates a really false discussion around what actually would make the school work. And employers will always look for incentives to pay less. That's just the norm. But like the ability to have conversations around give and take around conditions that make school worthwhile would really improve the culture and climate of the school. And there are so many things that can be negotiated and discussed that do not require money or require less money, less investment. Because when you see as much high teacher turnover or staff turnover, what that means is the district now has to pay a lot more money to recruit, retrain, or train and mentor and retain newer employees than it is to keep the veteran employees. So whatever cost you might make up in terms of salary on the flush, you actually make up you lose in terms of actually having to bring in all the new folks or restructure and deal with stuff like that. And that's why we don't only just lose like teachers and educational assistants, we lose principals for that reason. We lose administrators for that reason because they burn the hell out because they are told to do impossible tasks and get very little support in actually being able to make their decisions, and they get to be the manager, the middle manager, and the bringer of bad news. And then the ones who are competent, who are good, who are empathetic tend to leave the system themselves then get replaced by yes people as opposed to people who know what's best for schools or are willing to work collaboratively. That's my rant.
Thank you. Go ahead.
One thing I would add too is look at where unions typically start. They start in industries that are often inherently dangerous or have working conditions, and that is what motivates people to unionize. As there are things going on here that are illegal, they're going to get people killed. And you look at construction, you look at healthcare, you look at food service workers, just environments where it is the workplace that is motivating people. Having the wages is great. Like I've talked about, our members talk to non-union construction workers all the time who come up to them and say, thank you, I will never join a union. However, I just got a raise because you all got a raise, and they know that I will leave to go work for a union if this continues. So we do raise the bar, and there's incredible things that have happened in this country that are solely because unions push for them. But they do start for that reason very often in workplaces where it is a workplace safety culture issue.
And if I could add one thing, when you hear a story of something happening in a school that's negative. The reaction could be if there was a union addressing that issue, that would have been taken care of perhaps. And if it was funded appropriately. So between funding and school, I mean, that should always be the answer, I think. But you've got a question.
A question, okay, basically my understanding is elementary, but, okay, so see teachers regain the right to collectively bargain. And maybe if you've answered this already and I just didn't understand it, how will that impact the legislative's financial fiscal constraints? How does that work together? If the teachers are able to collectively bargain and, get a boost in salary and benefits, how does that work together with the financial situation in the state that's put out by the legislature?
Anyway, Mike.
Budget constraints.
Can I say that budget constraints are imaginary? We have a $6 to $7 billion surplus in this state. They could adequately fund public education in every district. So
And they have to then, right?
They would.
I mean, here.
They wouldn't have to because it depends. Well, I mean, since we're less gerrymandered, they might actually have to listen. But let's not continue recycling the narrative that we don't have the money to pay for it.
Right.
We have the money to pay for it, and let's remind ourselves it's our fucking money. I pay as many taxes, probably more taxes than Diane Hendricks and Menard and Pleasant Rowland and all these fucking billionaires. So I don't to say all of a sudden they deserve a break versus me or the people that are in my neighborhood is utter BS. And we can't keep falling into the false conversation that the only way moving forward is if I take more money out of your pocket. It's we gotta begin talking about reforming all of our systems, not just school finance, but just financing in general, about why so few are profiting from the suffering of so many.
I would say fuck yes. Sarah.
But to your point, one of the things that we've had since 1992 under our wonderful past education governor, Tommy Thompson, is something called revenue caps. Revenue caps aren't something that are being looked at in this particular case. Revenue caps mean that districts can only raise the amount of money they bring in by a capped amount, which is set by the legislature, who love education. And it's pretty random. And so they might say, well, this year you can increase your revenue by $100 per student, even though that increase might be taken up entirely by the cost of utilities, for example. Okay, it's just random. And revenue caps are still in our state law.
Mm-hmm.
We had another one, QEO, but that.
Yeah, 93. If I could add one thing, when we talk about education, I think we need to reclaim the term right.
Yes.
You have a right to public education. Every single person has the right to a free and full public education. You also have the right to health care. And I think we need to start talking about rights as opposed to how do we expand this. It's you got a right, do it. And also raising up as opposed to you've got all this stuff, we should cut you down so that let's raise everybody up. We've got rights, let's take care of each other. Questions, last question.
I just, one comment, unintended costs. I know of teachers or families where both were teachers, had lots of little kids, school loans had to pay off, had to go on food stamps. The other thing is the mental health of teachers and physical health. The health care costs for all of us have gone up because of this law.
Yep.
Thank you. Perfectly said. Last word.
Make sure you vote education. Education friendly, not just friendly, but people who see education as a core value.
And I'd like to add, vote no and have all your friends show up in the August 13th.
If I could add just one thing, after we vote for people, then we show up and hold them accountable for the next, for the full term as opposed to giving it away. Thank you all for being here, thank you. Yeah.